All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast and happy to welcome back to the show, friend of the show, author of Trumpocalypse, staff writer at The Atlantic, David Frum. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So what have you been up to? It's been a while, and I think you've been abroad, right?
I was in Germany for 12 days lecturing at German universities. I was there in the middle period of the Gaza war that erupted 30 days ago, as you and I record. I was in quite a number of cities that I'd never seen before, smaller centers, and talked to student groups and transatlantic groups. So I don't know that I had a full spectrum of German opinion because these are people who are either, as I say, they're students, so they're predisposed to be interested in the world, or they're people very committed to the U.S.-German transatlantic relationship. But it still is a quite broad, strange section of society I met.
I mean, I know it's like you said, it's not necessarily representative of German thought, but did you learn anything? I know you were there to speak, but
Yeah.
did you pick up any insights?
Um, well, you definitely saw the slowdown of the European economy everywhere around you. That we have had this. They are under economic pressure because of basically the campaign of sabotage of their energy resources that the Russians imposed on them. They are scrimping and saving to get by on less natural gas. You saw that uh, when I was in the eastern part of the country, I had the benefit of the huge investment in infrastructure that was done over the period from 1990 to 2005. And then when you're in the western part of the country, you saw where the infrastructure spending didn't happen. And so, strangely enough, Western Germany, the richer part, the public infrastructure all looks much shabbier than in the East because the money went to rebuild the East. Um, and I think it was just generally true that the people who are most passionate about the U.S.-German relationship and the US, and the German-Israel relationship tended to be older. That they were reflecting the experiences of an earlier time, and it does leave you wondering whether newer generations share the commitment to transatlantic relationships, to democracy, to support for Israel that so characterized and distinguished the Germans of the post-war generations.
All right. A lot has happened. A lot of things I want to run by you, but I guess we should start with the latest, which are these New York Times
Yeah.
CNN poll battleground state, swing state numbers, where Donald Trump is leading in sorry, I'm getting a little freaked out. I can barely say it. Donald Trump is leading
Yeah.
in 6 of the 7 states that we believe or that they believe will be the swing states. I mean, what did you just make of that overall?
Well, you and I posted, I think, probably on the same day, exactly the opposite points of view on this. That I posted an article noting the similarities to Barack Obama's 2011 numbers, and you posted an article saying it's not at all like Barack Obama's 2011 numbers. Um, and of course, we're both right. The similarity is that if you were to look at the graph, the graph, which the Obama graph shows stronger support in the first year of his presidency than Biden ever had, followed by a very steep decline in the year in his third year, 2011, hitting bottom in the second half of 2011. And not only low approval numbers, but high disapproval numbers, over 50% disapproval, and then a rise in 2012. So the Biden graph, the toboggan slide downhill is not as steep because he was never as high. But the second half of 2011 of the third year looks the same. Who knows what the fourth year holds?
So my argument was that yes, it is true that in 2011 Barack Obama was underwater in terms of approval ratings, but it's just a tough analogy for me to buy. Partly because Obama was so talented politically, partly because Romney and Trump are just so different, and partly because if you look at the approval ratings, although everything you said is true, Obama's ratings go up and down. They tend to bob up and down.
Yeah,
Sometimes he's above 50%. If there's a good news cycle, then he goes down.
yeah,
Whereas Biden, after the Afghanistan withdrawal, he went below water and he has nothing he has done has changed that. So it suggests to me that Biden is kind of a victim. Like, I don't know that he controls his own destiny the way Obama could go out
yeah.
and I think hustle and persuade and change his numbers if he wanted to.
Well, here's I think the truth in what you say, and then I'll propose some counter truths. So since we now know how this cycle ended with Obama and what happened in 2012, and we now know what those numbers were trying to tell us back in 2011. So through American history, since the coming of the popular vote in the 1820s, if a president runs for reelection from 1820 to Obama, one of two things happens. Either the president outright loses, or if the president doesn't outright lose, the president's popularity goes up. You either go up or out is the rule for every election from Jackson to Obama. Obama breaks that rule. In between 2008 and 2012, he actually got a lower share of the vote in 2012 than he did in 2008. And in micro terms, his vote from every demographic category you can think of slides between 2008 and 2012. What rescues him is that he activates African American support in ways never before seen in 2012. The reason the Romney people were confident that they were going to win in 2012 was their polling picked up Obama's slide, and young people, old people, whites and Latinos and Asians, every group, men, women, they picked it all up. And they hypothesized Obama in 2008 hit a record for black turnout. And so they hypothesized that's the record. That's what he's going to get in 2012. It can't go up from 2008, obviously. So he's down in every category. He was already high in 2008 in African Americans. So that's the math. And what then happened was it turned out that wasn't the math, that Obama actually turbocharged black turnout. 2012 is the one and only election in American history where black turnout is higher than white turnout. And because of this heroic performance of black voter turnout, it just sufficiently offset Obama's decline in every other group to put him over the top in the popular vote and the electoral college. So the question you ask about Biden is, well, where's his turbo? How does he activate people? And you can also see, we know he's in some trouble with the groups that liked Obama so much. So turbocharging it is going to be hard. So that's the difference. But the difference in Biden's favor is the second half of 2011, we did not, in fact, yet know that Romney was going to be the Republican nominee. It was a very open field in 2012, and there's a lot of uncertainty. It was quite uncertainty until fairly deep into 2012. In 2023, we know that it's going to be Trump. And we also know that the Biden people have been investing their resources to raise the president's numbers, so far unsuccessfully. They have not yet begun attacking Trump's numbers. And I'll leave you with this one thought. I'm going to forget his name, but the man who did the brutal advertising for Jesse Helms when Jesse Helms was in the Senate talked about the power of negative advertising. He was in some panel discussion, and somebody said, the people at Wendy's, when they're advertising a Wendy's burger, always tell you how good a Wendy's burger is. They don't bother with going negative. They tell you how great their Wendy's burger is. And he said, well, the guy who did Jesse Helms' advertising said, well, maybe Wendy's wouldn't be in third place if they could tell you that McDonald's burgers had worms. So I think what we're going to see in 2024 is that the entire Biden effort is going to be going negative on Trump. And that hasn't really started yet. Trump is out of the news cycle for most people, not the people pay obsessive attention to politics, but most people, he's out of the cycle. He's dealing with his legal troubles. Biden hasn't yet spent hundreds of millions of dollars to remind everybody what Trump is like. And when he does, that may have an impact.
And I agree, like, on one hand, Trump is much worse than Mitt Romney, and there's so much more to work with if you're attacking Donald Trump than there is. But Romney, to a lot of Americans, was a blank slate. I think Obama and his team were able to demonize Mitt Romney and kind of introduce him to the public as Gordon Gekko, who has binders full of women, who puts his dog Seamus on the roof of the car, who wants to declare a war on women, who thinks 47% of Americans are deplorable or whatever. With Trump, can you really move opinion with advertisement? Don't we already know everything we need to know about Donald Trump?
Yes Yes, you can. I believe you can, and for this reason. Um, when I wrote two books about Donald Trump, and I published my first in 2018, and and the book did very well commercially, and did a lot of speaking, and people were always congratulating me on my research in the book. And I always found it ironic because, in fact, I hadn't done any reporting for the book. I'd broken. There are all these reporters' books where the key is you break one news story from, you save one story from your work for a paper and you put it in your book, and that drives Morning Joe, and there's your book. And so I said to people, I've done no reporting for this book. The reason it feels new is because you've forgotten already everything that was in it. And in 2018, people had forgotten so many terrible things that had happened just in the first 2 years that when they read the book, it felt like getting a big mackerel in the face of horror because, oh my God, he did that? Yeah, he did that. And you saw it, it happened on television. You just forgot. So there are the way that Trump has spoken about every particular voting group in this nation, uh, uh, those things. I think there's also one more thing that has insulated him a little bit. The part of the Trump record that most energizes and worries people who pay a lot of attention to politics is secondarily his corruption and primarily his attack on democratic institutions. But the part I think that speaks to the people who are going to decide the election is just what a jerk he is. So you, you know, the kind of hard bitten, the kind of person who worries about democracy, doesn't has forgotten that Trump mocked a little boy for believing in Santa Claus.
Yeah.
But that's the Seamus on the roof story. What, he mocks a kid for believing in Santa Claus? That he'd do that? That his the sexual assault conviction, which again sort of is drowned out in the other cases. That those things are powerful, and I think those are all going to be back in 2024, even though people know them, but they've forgotten.
I want to ask you. So, I think one of the problems Joe Biden is facing is there's almost like a crack up coming in the Democratic Party, it seems, and we see it on display with the Israel Gaza war, where it seems like a good chunk of Biden's base, young people, certainly, Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in key
Yeah.
states like Michigan, who are unhappy with his support of Israel. And it makes me wonder, like, how widespread this is. Like, is Joe Biden the last vestige of kind of like the Democratic Party that wasn't a radical left wing party? Like, once Biden, who's hanging on by a thread, like once he goes,
Yeah.
is this going to be a Rashida Tlaib type party?
Um, I see more opportunity than risk for Biden. I don't think there's a crack up here. I think there's a lot of effort to take tiny slices of polling and create an impression that the Democratic Party is split 60-40 on Israel Palestine. Whereas the people who are actually going to vote in for a Democratic candidate are probably split 90-10. And that, in fact, this is actually Biden's Sister Souljah moment. This is his moment to remind most of America he's not a man of the left at all. And when you look at all the polling on this, you see overwhelming and rising support for Israel. And although it's less among people under 24, it is still the predominant view among people under 24. People under 24 are more likely to say we want a ceasefire now, but they may not understand the full implications of that. But if you say, who are you more sympathetic to in this war? Again, a majority of people under 24 are with Israel. So there is a lot of push polling, an attempt to manipulate it. So you'll see something like Biden's had a drop off of support among Arab Americans in Michigan. Okay, how important to the Democratic coalition are Arab Americans in Michigan? Well, they're not nothing. We saw, look, anti-Jewish feeling was one of the things that tipped Florida to Bush in 2000. I remember this very vividly, that there was a substantial, not a substantial, but a meaningful Muslim vote in Florida, especially in South Florida. That vote seems to have went 80% to Bush in 2000, and all of it, they were voting against having a Jew on the ticket. So and they were voting against Lieberman specifically. So that may have tipped Florida and with it the nation. So these small groups can be, but the idea that when you've lost the Arab Americans in Michigan, a Democratic candidate can't survive that in a country of hundreds of millions of people. That's not true. And meanwhile, this is an opportunity for Biden to offset some of the harm he did himself with the Afghanistan decision by showing people, I am a candidate of strength. I can make decisions. He's twice visited a war zone under fire, not protected by American troops. No other president in American history has done that. Those images are a pretty good answer to the question of feebleness. The idea of imagining Donald Trump flying into somewhere dangerous, and it boggles the mind. He'd never do it. He can't say no to a jelly donut. Never mind say yes to going under the hazards of open fire.
It is interesting though, because I mean I agree with you. I've been as someone who's a conservative, I was never expecting Biden to be great,
Yeah.
but he's been better than I would have thought that a Democrat would be. And he, by standing with Ukraine, standing with Israel, like those are things that I think conservatives would have applauded 15 minutes ago.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of things that I see Biden doing that I like, but it just doesn't seem to translate into helping him ever with his approval rating.
Well, I think you said something earlier that I think is true, which is he is to a great extent a man out of time. That he is a Humphrey Muskie liberal of the 1970s in a different world. So Biden, it makes perfect sense that he has a much more activist and expensive domestic program than you or I would want, combined with robust support of allies, especially Democratic allies abroad, and total faith in the American military and the justice of its mission and the competence of its people. That in 1970, that made you a typical. The Democratic senators of 1970 were much more willing to spend money at home than the Democratic senators of 2020, but they were much less abashed about America's role in the world than some of the people in the Democratic Party are. They believe, that this is the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Lyndon Johnson. A great society at home, great America abroad. So that's Biden, and that is a little bit out of time. And I think he's suffering now. I think, look, he did one spending bill too many, goosed the inflation numbers, and he's paying the price for that. But in foreign policy, he has been more robust than I expected, because I think of the Biden of the years since 2010, where he was, and the Biden who made the decision in Afghanistan, and he did seem to be someone who was in retreat. And then with Ukraine, with Israel, he has rediscovered his inner Muskie and rediscovered his inner Humphrey and his belief in America's role in the world.
Now, I think you and I both believe that it's very, very likely to be Biden versus Trump next year. But we have this Republican debate coming up Wednesday night. Nikki Haley has emerged, I think, probably as maybe, probably maybe, possibly as the second place candidate. She certainly has an upward swing, whereas Ron DeSantis has been trending down. Now, he did just get the endorsement of the governor of Iowa the night before you and I are taping this. I guess the question is, do you think is there a chance, right? I know it's a long shot, but is there a chance that someone catches fire, that that they win Iowa or New Hampshire, parlay that into South Carolina? Of course, Nikki Haley, that would be presumably a strong state for her. Maybe Trump, in the meantime, is convicted of something.
Yeah.
One of the four things he's indicted on. Like, is this completely outlandish at this point, or is there a chance?
No, you've just laid out the one scenario. It's a 1-2 punch. So the only hope for these candidates was to go on all-out attack from the very beginning. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that would have worked. That might have failed. But if you're not willing to take the field against Goliath, you're certainly not going to win. If you take the field against Goliath, you may also lose. Probably you'll lose. But if you stay home and hide, then you're definitely going to lose. And so they have been saying, all the other would-be Republicans have all been saying, well, maybe somebody else will go out there and take out Goliath, and then I can, mock the corpse. But that it doesn't work that way. So the only hope that anybody has is at this point that something else takes out Goliath, and that is the American legal process. And if something happens that convicts Trump, or even in the civil case, if his businesses are dissolved, that may jostle some votes loose, and then someone else can then scoop up the victory that they didn't have the character to earn for themselves. At this point, though, it does seem like, whatever else you say about Trump, like he's a thing. He's a big thing in American life, and these other people look real small and real timid, and even someone as universally. I mean, I think this is one of the things that has been an issue with DeSantis is if you're as universally unpleasant a human being as DeSantis is, but there's one person on earth that you tiptoe around. We all know it's not because you like him, because you don't like anybody except your immediate family. What you're demonstrating is you're scared of this guy. If you're not if you're not scared, you're nasty. If you're not nasty, it's because you're scared. And DeSantis is scared of him. And how do you, especially in a Republican primary, which so rewards domination and masculinity in its most toxic forms? I mean, and if people can feel the fear, and Republicans especially feel the fear, and they don't like it. They don't respect it. They may like it. They don't respect it. So at this point, I would say it takes a 1-2 punch, but I'm not sure that these people even have the ability to deliver the second punch after the first.
And Trump's been on trial as we're taping this week. I must confess, I really haven't paid much attention to it. But have you gleaned anything
Yeah.
from this process?
So just one more thing about the Trump on trial. Ron DeSantis, I'm going to forget where it happened. Somebody asked him, what is the difference between you and Donald Trump? And he talked about his record of achievement, blah, 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 blah. He should have said, the difference between me and Donald Trump is I won't be in prison on voting day 2024. He should have said that.
Pat Buchanan would have said that.
Yeah, well, because you know what? Take your shot. Take your shot. Because the blah, 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 that's certainly not going to work. He's going to be in prison on voting day. That may actually concentrate some minds. So I think in this civil trial, again, won't send Trump to prison, but remember, he's already lost on summary judgment. We are arguing over the scale of the fines and other penalties that he must face.
This is him overinflating the size of his condo and Trump Tower and things like that.
When you say it like that, it sounds harmless. This is a case where what Trump over his career would have a property, and he would give one value to the bank and a different value to the tax authorities. Now, there is no innocent explanation for that. Now, it's possible you are defrauding the bank, it's possible you are defrauding the tax authorities, and it's possible you are defrauding both. But it is not possible that you are doing something proper, because you don't get to, when you do valuations, it's not about your feelings. It's about your obligations to some other person who has the power to require the report, either the bank, in which case you're borrowing too much money too cheaply and cheating the bank shareholders, or you're undervaluing your property for the tax authorities and paying too little taxes and cheating the people of New York. Either way, you're committing a serious, serious fraud. And I will say one thing that is maybe between the lines on the bank fraud story. Is Trump's defense on the bank fraud is, well, no, the loans got repaid, so no harm, no foul. Or at least to date, or many, I should say, many of the loans were paid, others were not. But the problem is when Trump has a long record of default, so the risk of default was very high, and he was lying to bankers about the value of the collateral. But what this case smells to me like is, in addition to overstating his value to the bank, the reason the bank accepted it was because Trump was making side deals with individual people at the bank. The big loan that was too risky got an individual banker a bigger bonus than that individual banker would have got, and was shifted. The bank employee claimed the benefit in the form of a bonus, and the bank shareholders got the risk in the form of insufficient collateral to back up a loan to a very dubious lender. Now, a lot of this is hard to explain, but what is going to be clear at the end of it is one of the penalties the judge can impose is the dissolution of the Trump organization and forbidding Donald Trump ever to do business in New York again, and forbidding his children ever to do business in New York again. If that's the penalty, the case, which is a little complicated for most people to understand, a little more detailed than most people will want to understand. People get it. This guy was such a criminal that the state of New York has dissolved the Trump Corporation, and you can't call it Trump Tower anymore because that organization can't exist anymore.
It will be interesting if there are consequences. I mean, this will have been a story arc that has lasted a decade. And I mean, actually, the story is much longer. There have been many, many years of Donald Trump acting with impunity, getting away with everything. And if at some point there are consequences and people actually have to pay a price that are not bailed out, that will be, I think that will be an important lesson, kind of a learning moment for a whole bunch of people, not just Donald Trump. But if he skates completely, which he might, that's a lesson as well.
Yes. Um, look, this is Donald Trump's real world business career ended in 1989. He inherited a big bunch of money from his father. He used that to try to become a genuine, honest to goodness real estate developer and mogul. He bought Eastern Airlines. He bought the Plaza Hotel, and he lost all of that in the downturn of 1990. And the banks seized his assets and essentially put him on an allowance in an effort to try to realize some value from the wreckage of the genuine Fred Trump created, Donald Trump squandered business empire Trump had inflated in the 1980s. Since 1989, Trump's gone through a series of other careers. He tried to be a casino mogul. He tried to be, he became a very low end, bottom sucking real estate guy in the 2000s, and then he became a TV star. But I think you would be surprised at how many people out there think of Donald Trump as a self created business success.
Oh, yeah.
And the discovery
Definitely.
that he was neither self created nor a business success, that he was not Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney actually built businesses. Trump didn't. Trump wrecked businesses, but then he became a show business figure. That's what he was. And that's the thing that people don't understand. And this trial will be sort of the culmination to that story of Donald Trump, that his last toehold as a pretend businessman gets forfeit. And he will be nothing but a celebrity and someone who trades name ID for money.
Is there something about that, though, that you admire? The resilience, the reinvention? I mean, I'll be honest with you, there's a part of me that is impressed, and the toughness and the refusal to sort of go quietly into that good night. I think I would have folded long ago if I were Donald Trump.
Um, if the resilience didn't every time involve cheating and deceiving so many people. So um, my family has a real estate background in the city of Toronto. And of course, we'd all heard of Donald Trump as the celebrity in New York, and we all knew he'd gone bust in 1989. And that was more or less the end of his business career. And then he developed this second career licensing his name to other people's projects. And so the way he really came tightly into view as a businessman for me was in the early 2000s. He licensed his name to a project in Toronto. And this is a time when Toronto had a desperate shortage of the new level of five-star hotels. That business travel had become much more luxurious, and Toronto had nice hotels, but nothing nice enough for the new world. And suddenly there were a bunch of projects to build a new Ritz Carlton, to build a new Four Seasons, and make the hotel scene less dumpy. So a group of developers from a post-Soviet republic who were known as bad actors in the Toronto world hired Donald Trump to put his name on a Trump Hotel Toronto. And then they came up with a scheme, and this is the part where everyone in my little world became aware of him. They did something that had never been done before, which is they began franchising the hotel rooms to investors. So there would be room 1108, and they would go to a, a nurse, a taxi driver, almost all of them immigrants, and say, Donald Trump, the most successful real estate man in the world, has come to Toronto to build a hotel, and you can own room 1108. And all the revenue from room 1108, after deducting some fees, of course, that we have to collect, that will be yours. And no one had ever financed a hotel this way. No one had ever. Hotels are an extremely variable business that the nurse and taxi driver have no business pledging their retirement savings to the hotel business. And if they do, it has to be highly um, they have to have you want to be in some big REIT with thousands of hotels and highly predictable revenues. The idea you would own room 1108 is crazy. It's just reckless. And but they sold it because on the strength of the Trump name. And of course, all of these people lost everything. And when I say everything, they lost $80,000, all of their particular everything. And people had no business no one, even the roughest real estate guy I knew in Toronto, would never have dared say to this nurse or this taxi driver, give me all your life savings and let me roll the dice with them. They would have been ashamed to do that. They might have done that with a more sophisticated investor, but roll the dice with the nurse, really? That's terrible. Donald Trump and his group did that. And of course, people were ruined. And so you say, do I admire the resilience, or is it shamelessness that allowed him to do that? No, I do not. By the way, the hotel has been exists, and it's been bought by another chain, and it's doing okay. But it remains a weird property. It remains everyone's sort of, if you're spending top dollar for a hotel in Toronto, it remains very much your third or fourth choice after the Four Seasons and the Shangri-La and the Ritz-Carlton. But it's there, it exists, but it exists only after wiping out the savings of dozens of people who couldn't afford to lose them.
So, you and I did not have a chance to talk about all the drama taking place in the House Speaker's race, Kevin McCarthy being ousted, and then Jim Jordan having a shot at it, being the nominee, and multiple other Steve Scalise, other people I can't even remember, and then this guy, Mike Johnson.
Yeah.
I literally had to Google to know who this person was. Not a filthy rich politician, you will be happy
Yes.
to know. He is no Kevin Hearn. He is no Dean Phillips. That I assure you. But what did you make of this whole
Yeah.
process?
I saw in it there was a kind of interior logic. Everyone described it as mayhem and chaos, but it actually was the party reaching a consensus that the the deal in the House had been that the leadership pretended to like Trump, but didn't. And Kevin McCarthy had always despised Trump. I mean, he sucked up to him. You'll remember the story about Kevin McCarthy would have a staffer whose job it was. So Starburst candy comes in many different flavors, but there were two flavors Trump especially liked. And McCarthy, when he had a meeting with Trump, assigned a staffer to buy a crate of Starburst candies and then sift them so that only the candies Trump liked were in the candy jar when Trump arrived to meet McCarthy. So he would do this cringing, deferential, dog kick the dog attitude to Trump, while then behind Trump's back saying all these negative things about him. So that was the attitude of most of the House leadership. In a caucus that was about, split maybe 30-70 of people who Trump true believers, 30%, Trump non-true believers, maybe 70%. And the question was, who would veto whom? And they cycled through that there was a rebellion against McCarthy because the true Trump believers said, you're not a true Trump believer, which was true. And by the way, you're breaking other promises you've made to us, which was true. So then the non-Trump believers said, okay, well, we've got some other people who the 30% might like better. Why don't we try them? Why don't we try Steve Scalise? He's more doctrinarily right-wing than Kevin McCarthy. Maybe you like him. No. We've got Tom Emmer, who is not so right-wing, but who cares about the debt and deficit and all those things you pretend you care about. No. And then the true believer said, how about Jim Jordan? And the non-true believer said, he's too much of a jerk even for us. No. And they finally settled on, well, what if we get a Trump true believer who really believes in him, but is not an obviously horrible, impossible colleague? Someone, you lock the door to keep him from visiting your office. What if and that was the deal. But what we have settled is the true believers won and the non-true believers lost. And the non-true believers cycled through a number of alternatives in order to arrive at this result. So we have some clarity that even though the non-true believers are probably the majority in the House, because they're spineless worms, the true believers carry the day. And this is very ominous for Ukraine aid, because one of the situations we have on Ukraine aid is we have a 3/4 majority in the House of Representatives for helping Ukraine, but a 50-50 split inside the Republican Party. And one of the things that the Democrats were asking as their price for saving Kevin McCarthy, or the next Kevin McCarthy, was we want to be able, if 3/4 of the House favor something, we want to have a vote on it. And the Republican answer was no. It has to be carried by a majority of the majority. We are not governing for the whole House. We are governing for our caucus only. And on all of those things, the true believers won. And so I think we're heading toward some very critical situations. Um, uh, I think that the situation for Ukraine aid becomes very difficult because the non-true believers have made clear they won't stand up. And we may be heading to some kind of Biden impeachment crisis in 2024 that, again, the true believers are going to drive on, and the non-true believers will not have the character to stand up to.
So I read this book in 1998. It's a book. It's more of a pamphlet, but it's called Confrontational Politics. And it
Yeah,
was written by this guy, H.L. Richardson, who's the founder of Gun Owners of California
yeah,
and Gun Owners of America. And he was urging, his premise was that like Leninists and people of the left understood that confrontation is good,
yeah,
whereas conservatives like comity and peace, and we do not like confrontation. And what happens is when there's a confrontation, there's a fight. The people who don't like to fight, they they might gird their loins for a little bit, but eventually they'll settle and they'll compromise halfway.
yeah,
And then you'll do a strategic retreat. And then the left, the Leninists, whatever, will attack again and ask for more. And then those of us who don't like confrontation, who don't like fighting, who want peace, who care about institutions and all that, we will give them a little more to appease them, right? And this book was written by a conservative, 25 years
that's incredible.
ago. And it seems to me, and this goes along with the whole love affair that the right now has with Saul Alinsky. But it does strike me that people like Matt Gaetz have learned these lessons
Yeah.
and are actually winning by implementing them.
Now, Matt Gaetz's agenda may not be so ideological. It may be that he has some personal troubles and he needs a speaker who's beholden to him and will help him protect himself from his personal troubles. So, but the others agree. I think that's very astute. Fred Siegel, the great urban studies person who just died, wrote a book about Rudy Giuliani back when Rudy Giuliani was Rudy Giuliani, in which he described Rudy Giuliani of the 1990s as an immoderate centrist. And that you think that's a very neat phrase, and it's something you need. What like that's been the whole story of the Trump years. That uh, that basically a faction of the Republican Party said to the what was then the majority, if you don't yield to us, we're going to burn this building down. And the correct answer to that is you're not going to burn it down because I'm going to burn it down first. And I have a second building and you don't. That was the thing I never understood with McCarthy and Gaetz. That what a different kind of person would have done the first time Gaetz tried to stick him up is walk across the hall to Hakeem Jeffries and say, I'm going to need every once in a while 24 votes to organize the House. I'm never going to ask you to vote on a substantive bill, on a budget or anything like that, but on matters of organization, to raise the debt ceiling, to pass concurrent, I'm going to need 24 votes from time to time. There must be something you want. And then when you meet Matt Gaetz, go there and say, I have 24 Democratic votes in my pocket, more if I need them. So screw you. No, we are not stopping whatever investigation it is that you're afraid of.
They would do anything for love, but they won't do that.
They won't
They're
do that.
not willing to work with Democrats for anything
Right,
like
because
that.
and I get it that it's partly rational that would come because maybe they couldn't hold any of the Republicans if they did that, but it's partly because in the end, look, when this goes to the theme of your book. When I think this is true for many politicians, but for Republicans more than most. When you have recruited your members of the House based on their ability to ingratiate themselves with very wealthy people, obviously you're recruiting lapdogs. You're not recruiting people of character. The person of character meets the first job requirement and says, I want no part of that. Uh,
Yeah.
and so you get a caucus full of people who are recruited for their lack of character. Um, and so guess what? When the character tests come, of course they fail. Of course they fail because their very first fundraising call required them to pretend to agree with someone whose opinions they had no respect for, and they just wanted their money.
Let me ask you about this. I see an interesting evolution happening, and you tell me if you think that there is a parallel here. So when I look at from Paul Ryan to Kevin McCarthy to Mike Johnson,
Yeah,
we're going from like, so Paul Ryan was a guy who didn't actively dislike, he actively disliked Trump, but he was willing to sort of cave to him, right? That's level one. Level two was Kevin McCarthy, who I think was more pro Trump than Ryan, but also came of age before Trump, was inherently an establishment figure. And now we've arrived at Mike Johnson, who is a guy who is a product of the Trump era.
yeah,
I mean, I think he's more of a social conservative probably than a MAGA guy, but still, he was elected in the Trump era. He's never been elected before that. And it reminds me, David, of your famous line about the velociraptors learning to work the door. I think that if you look at Trump's administration, we had a similar evolution where it started out being staffed by people, chiefs of staff, who never liked Trump, but were willing to work with him for the sake of the country. Then we got people who were establishment types, but they were willing to go along with Trump or be co-opted by Trump for out of ambition or opportunity. And then ultimately, we're going to, certainly in a second term, if Trump gets a second term, end up with true believers.
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
think that's a parallel with what
No, I
happened in
think
this
that's right,
secret?
and that's that. And those are very much when you see the plans for the second term, which are all about attacking the structures of the American state. Um, destroying the Department of Justice, trying to use the military for political purposes. I think that you can see that the true believers also have a true believer agenda, and this takes us back to the question about Biden, because one of the ways that this man out of time character to him may be very dangerous to him in 2024. Biden believes and acts on the assumption that the 2024 map will look a lot like the 2016 and 2020 maps, and that he survives or fails based on his ability to appeal to blue collar workers in the industrial upper Midwest. And that Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio will once again be where the election, and Western Pennsylvania are where the election will once again be decided. But there's a new map that showed up a little bit in 2021, and that is that we need to stop thinking about red states and blue states and start thinking about metropoles and knowledge centers versus uh, rural areas and hinterlands. And that maybe the Democratic majority, the Biden majority, rests on suburban Atlanta and suburban Nashville and suburban Denver, not on these industrial areas. And maybe all of this effort on protectionism and trade that they're doing, maybe that's a little that's fighting the last war. And the next war looks like let those MAGA votes, let Trump's plan to politicize the military and use it to crush dissent in this country, make that the issue. And there are a lot of, maybe they don't get, maybe in uh, industrial areas in the Midwest, they still care about keeping out Chinese hubcaps. But in other areas, maybe these issues resonate more. And there may be a kind of shift coming. Um, and if Mike Johnson is the face of the Republican Party, there are a lot of people who don't want that, and think a lot of it just like the preoccupations seem weird, and like how much of my personal time, if my children are grown, but if my son were a teenager, how much of my personal time would I devote to policing his use of pornography? Like, you give him a little instruction at the beginning about why he shouldn't do it. You pretend to be shocked if you catch him using it, and then it's like of things he could do, it's like one of the least constant. But like this is clearly like for Mike Johnson, preoccupation number one, and you think that's nuts. That's really nuts, and really, really, really nuts. And a lot of
I
other
don't know.
people
I
think it's
push
nuts.
back a little bit. Um, I think no. So first of all, I think I'm probably like you in terms of my parenting style, but I mean, I think you could make an argument. I'm sure there are people who believe that like that pornography is, and these are not all born again Christian types either. That pornography is incredibly harmful and that it ties into problems we're seeing with young men um, who are actually not engaging in real life relationships, who are very lonely. That so like I wouldn't just cavalierly dismiss it.
I'm not cavalierly dismissing it. I'm just dismissing it as uh, uh, there are a lot of things in this world that I think it would be better if the world were different. Um, uh, if I'm, but when I go through the top five things that I'm worried about in this life, I mean, clearly that this complex of issues. I think a lot of them, there are a lot of issues where the question, I think, especially if you're a politician for voters, is not are you right. The question is your priority list the same as mine? And I think here of something that my British conservative friends discovered in their election of, I think it was 2005. They had a leader called Michael Howard. And Michael Howard is a very intellectual man, very data driven, very Paul Ryan like. And they'd had a couple of bad, in 1997, they'd had a bad election. 2001, they'd had a bad election. And Howard was determined not to repeat this mistake. And so he mobilized all the data resources of the British Conservative Party. He said, I want 5 issues where some, like 60%, 70%, I don't know, of the British public agree with us. 5 issues where we are confident that we have the overwhelming backing of British society. And they found his 5 issues, and that became, and we're not talking about anything else. These are our 5 issues. The public agrees with us, and anyone who talks about anything else will be fired. They lost again. And after, when they were going through the records trying to figure out why they lost, it turned out that while the public agreed with them on every one of these 5 issues, the public did not agree that these were the right 5 issues.
Right.
and your preoccupations are not ours. And even I sort of agree.
Well, in fairness to Johnson, though, he's not yet pushing this legislatively. This is something he did in his own home with his son. And I do think there's a danger that, so, I'm an evangelical Christian, obviously a very flawed one, as are we all. And I think there's a danger that the left are going to conflate. So my problem with Mike Johnson is he supported the big lie.
Yeah.
And not that he cares maybe a little too much about whether his son's, looking at porn. And so I would like to go after Mike Johnson with a scalpel. And I fear that what's going to happen is, if you are a, Christian who's going to church, Wednesday night or whatever, the attacks on Mike Johnson are going to signal people in my church, oh yeah, they're against all of us.
Yeah.
There is persecution coming against you. It's not just a joke. And you don't even have to be a MAGA person to qualify for their hatred.
Yeah,
they don't
I'm
like
not talking about how one would criticize them, or even if one should, because speakers of the House are usually pretty technical people. It's a mistake to go after them for anything. I'm just, how do people get defined? I'm reading McKay Coppen's excellent book on Mitt Romney right now, and as I said, I voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. I liked Romney Care. I've always I've met him on a few occasions and always intensely admired his shift of mind. I recognize that he's maybe a little too perfect for president in a democratic society, that like he's just good at everything and handsome and tall and has a beautiful wife and wonderful children and lots of grandchildren. And so that may have been too luxurious a dish to serve to the average American voter. But one of the things that they describe is that nothing ended up defining him more than the Seamus the dog story, which is, by the way, a bitterly unfair story. That this one forgets the details. So Romney is a period. The story comes from a time in his life when Romney is beginning to become rich, but he refuses to act like it. And so the family lives in Boston. They've rented a summer place in Quebec. So it's a long drive. And Romney is, of course, driving one of those big although he's got at this point tens of millions of dollars. He's driving the family in a big station wagon with the luggage, and they have to take the dog. And there isn't any room to. Now, one answer would be, why don't we charter a jet and fly all of us in comfort and luxury to our vacation, which I could easily do. I could easily, but no, that's not Mitt Romney. What I'm going to do is I'm going to map a way to use the car space as efficiently as possible, fitting in the kids and their entertainment equipment and their comic books and the luggage. And then I've got this crate for the dog. And the story of it was Romney's joy in the solving the problem.
And he claimed that the dog loved it up there. And
And
I'm willing to believe
yeah,
that that's possible.
the point is, even if none of that is true, even if it was a bad ride for the dog, that if you say, look, we're thinking about making this person president of the United States, and they've been right in every business decision, they've been right in every personal decision, they slightly miscalculated on the dog comfort situation on this one ride to Canada back in 1993 or whenever it was. So I don't know, that seemed kind of much. But these things stick. And the question is, because they're answering the question, one of the threshold questions people have about very important politicians is, can I trust you to look out for me? Because most of the time, I'm not going to be watching. I just need to know that you are approaching problems with values that are consistent with mine and with some care and concern for me. I need to know that you're not sociopathic, that you're not indifferent, that you're not too insulated by money, as you describe in your book, or just that you're not too much of a blinking weirdo. And so that's why they're vulnerable to stories like, yeah, I mean, I can see why a parent would make some effort to, especially if the parent had some warning that this was a problem or came from a culture where they believed that the reason young men were having more trouble with intimacy than they used to do was because of pornography, rather than, as I would hypothesize, that pornography is a consequence, not the cause. Um, uh, but whatever. What I want to know
David,
is,
would you be willing to go in with me and we can monitor each other's porn consumption just to keep each other accountable?
uh,
I'm going to make the offer right now.
I think you would. I think if you were one of the things I keep discovering my YouTube videos is keep getting fed old episodes of Yes Minister. Uh, is I
He
have
knows you too
I do
well.
have a highly aberrant internet consumption, but maybe not aberrant in the way that is interesting to anybody else.
All right, well, I'm here if you need me. Let me
All
just
right,
say.
thank you. I
If
appreciate
you ever
that.
wanna go in on that, let me know. Always a pleasure talking with you. Glad to have you back stateside. Anything, that we missed or you wanted to plug?
Um, Nothing that I want to plug. Other than, well, there's something I'm doing that is going to come up, which we can maybe return, which is I've got a big article going up in the Atlantic at the end of this year, which I'm just finishing now, uh, to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the death of Woodrow Wilson in 1924. And I'm making the case for why it was a big mistake that shared by right and left to make Woodrow Wilson such a villain figure in American history.
Ooh,
There are things in his record that we need to rediscover for our time, and it's time to uncancel him. So
wow.
so maybe we'll come back and talk about that.
And you should try to go on the Jonah Goldberg Remnant podcast for that.
I cite Jonah's book in the article as an example of this trend that really starts in the Obama years of conservatives to make Woodrow Wilson the number one villain in American history. So
I look forward to
yeah,
reading
so
this.
I'm not truly a fan of Wilson's, but I think I think we've overdone it, and so I'm happy to come back and talk about that.
Let's do it. I love, contrarian arguments. Check it out. Stay tuned for that at The Atlantic. David Frum, thank you for coming back on the
Thank you.
news.